There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a gymnasium when a 7'3" body goes down and doesn't get back up the way it's supposed to. I have heard that silence before. I heard it in Portland when Bill Walton's foot gave out from under him for the last time. I heard it in a different register when Derrick Rose's knee buckled in Chicago, and the whole arena seemed to understand, before the replay even confirmed it, that something had just changed. In January of 2025, in a Japan B.League gym far from the cameras that usually follow the biggest basketball story to ever come out of the Philippines, that silence fell again. Kai Sotto went down against Mikawa, and when he got up, his season was over, and in some ways, so was the easy version of his story. This is not a comeback tale with a bow on it. Not yet. It is something more interesting than that, and more honest. The story of a 23-year-old center rebuilding a body and a timeline at once, chasing two things that don't always want to be chased together. An NBA opportunity that keeps circling back around, and a FIBA World Cup with his country's flag on his chest. 18 months ago, he tore the anterior cruciate ligament in his left knee. 18 months from now, if everything holds, he wants to be standing on a World Cup floor for the Philippines. Everything in between is the actual story. Sotto called it, in his own words on the day it happened, the darkest day of his basketball career. That's not hyperbole from a broadcaster looking for a hook. That's a 22-year-old kid, 7'3", the tallest hope his country has produced since the sport arrived there, watching a whole season and possibly a whole trajectory disappear in the time it takes a knee to buckle wrong. 3 seasons into his Japan B.League career, he had been having the best year of his professional life. Averaging somewhere around 14 points and better than 9 boards a night for the Kashigaya Alphas, shooting over 50% from the field, playing the kind of efficient, high IQ interior basketball that made NBA front offices start returning his agents' calls again. And then, mid-flight in a scramble for a rebound, it was gone. I want you to sit with how specifically cruel that timing was. This wasn't a declining player losing a step. This was a rising one, right at the point where usage and opportunity were finally catching up to talent, hit by the single injury that most reliably interrupts a big man's prime. The history here is not comforting. Bill Walton's career was a monument to what-ifs built on a foundation of feet and knees that would not cooperate. Yao Ming, another towering international project the NBA fell in love with, watched his body dictate terms to him until the terms ran out entirely. Big men pay a tax that guards rarely do, because the joints carrying 230 pounds at 7'3" simply absorb more violence per possession than the joints carrying 180 at 6'2". That is not opinion. That is physics, and it is why every scout who ever evaluated Sotto's frame quietly filed away a note about durability, long before the knee ever gave him a reason to. So here is where we begin, not with the injury itself, but with everything that has happened since, because that is where the real character of an athlete gets written. Anybody can look good in warm-ups. What Kai Sotto has spent the last year and a half doing is far harder, and far less photogenic. Rebuilding, on a schedule that keeps shifting, toward 2 finish lines that both matter enormously to him and to an entire basketball-obsessed nation of well over 100 million people who have been waiting, for the better part of a decade now, for one of their own to make it. Let's walk through what actually happened, layer by layer, because the surface story, man tears knee, man rehabs knee, man plays again, flattened something that was genuinely more complicated. The tear itself came with a complication that almost never makes the highlight reel of an injury story. The surgery got delayed. Nearly 3 weeks passed before Sotto went under the knife, not because of scheduling or bureaucracy, but because the swelling in the joint wouldn't come down enough for surgeons to operate safely. That detail matters more than it looks like it should. Orthopedic surgeons will tell you that a joint too swollen to operate on is often a joint hiding something else, a bone bruise, a meniscus tear layered on top of the ligament damage, additional structural chaos that the imaging hasn't fully sorted out yet. There was real concern, in the days after the injury, that this wasn't a clean ACL tear at all, that there might be more damage lurking underneath. Nobody wanted to say it too loudly, because Filipino basketball has been burned by exactly this scenario before. A young point guard playing through what was called a partial tear years earlier, in a UAAP season that basketball people in Manila still bring up as a cautionary tale. Sotto's camp, to their credit, refused to rush anything. The surgery happened when the knee was ready for it, not when the calendar demanded it. Consider what was on the other side of that patience. Sotto was in the 3rd and final year of his contract with the Kashigaya Alphas, a deal that had been paying him well and giving him the platform to develop away from the glare and impatience of the NBA machine. His team had every incentive to want him back on the floor as quickly as possible. And yet the read from everyone close to the situation was the same. There would be no shortcuts, no pressure to return before the joint said it was ready. That's not always how these stories go. It's worth noting how rarely a young athlete, especially one carrying the hopes of an entire country on a 7'3" frame, gets the luxury of a patient timeline. Sotto got one, or at least his people insisted on giving him one. What that meant, practically, was months of the unglamorous part of the job that never makes it into a highlight package. Non-contact drills. Soft defense against teammates in half-speed reps. The kind of work that looks like nothing on video and means everything to a surgically repaired joint learning to trust itself under load again. By November of 2025, 10 months removed from the tear, he was back in gyms, working alongside the Philippine national team even though he wasn't cleared to play, because being near the competitive environment, watching Gilas Pilipinas prepare for FIBA World Cup qualifying windows he couldn't yet be part of, kept his rehab motivated in a way that solitary treadmill work never could. He has talked about how difficult it was to simply watch practice, how the itch to be back out there competing gnawed at him even as he understood, intellectually, that his body wasn't finished healing. There's a teammate in this story worth pausing on, because it tells you something about how tight-knit and how small, in the best sense, Philippine basketball really is. AJ Edu, a frontcourt partner of Sotto's going back to their youth national team days, had already torn his own ACL twice and come back from both. Edu became something like a support line for Sotto during the darkest stretches of the rehab, the guy Sotto would message whenever the pain in the knee made him wonder if something was wrong, only to be told, gently and from hard-won experience, that the ache never fully disappears, that playing again doesn't mean pain-free, that this is simply what the other side of an ACL tear feels like for the rest of a career. That kind of peer knowledge, past player to player rather than doctor to patient, is an underrated piece of how athletes actually survive these rehabs psychologically. It's the sort of thing that never shows up in a box score and matters enormously anyway. By the turn of the year, the plan pointed toward a January 2026 return, and largely, that plan held. Sotto got back onto the Koshigaya floor for his first competitive minutes in over a year, a genuinely emotional milestone for a player and a country that had waited that long to see him move at NBA speed again. And then, in a cruelty that basketball seems to specialize in, his return was cut short almost immediately by an apparent ankle injury. It wasn't the same joint, and by all accounts it wasn't catastrophic, but it was one more reminder of how fragile the margin is for a player rebuilding trust in a body this large, this recently repaired. He was subsequently ruled out of the 2026 Japan B.League All-Star Game, another small disappointment stacked on top of a rehab timeline that had already tested his patience for a full year. Here is where the story bends toward the harder decision, the one that defines this current chapter more than any single injury update. Through the first half of 2026, as the Philippines pushed forward in the FIBA World Cup Asian Qualifiers windows toward the 2027 tournament, Sotto was largely absent. First because he wasn't physically ready, and then, more strikingly, because of a choice. When the third qualifying window arrived in the middle of the year, with Gilas Pilipinas needing frontcourt size and depth against a stacked Asian field, Sotto's camp made the call to have him sit out and redirect his focus toward reviving his NBA dream instead. He wasn't included in the national team's official pool for the upcoming World Cup qualifiers. Instead, he flew to Los Angeles to train, and accepted an invitation from the Orlando Magic to join their NBA Summer League roster for July of 2026, arriving in Orlando at the end of June, opening practice in early July, with Summer League games in Las Vegas against Detroit, Indiana, New York, and Portland on the calendar. I want to be careful here, because this is the part of the story where a lesser broadcast turns speculation into certainty, and I won't do that to you. Nobody outside Sotto's inner circle knows exactly how he weighed a World Cup qualifying window against an NBA Summer League invitation. But we can read the shape of the decision honestly. A player who went undrafted in 2022 despite pre-draft workouts with the Magic, the Knicks, the Kings, and the Pacers. A player who got a brief taste of NBA Summer League with Orlando back in 2023, 3 points, 3 rebounds across 2 games, hardly the kind of sample that settles anything, before a lower back injury clouded even that limited opportunity. A player who has spent 3 seasons proving himself in Japan, through Hiroshima, through Yokohama, through Koshigaya, building a legitimate professional resume an ocean away from the league he's always wanted. When an opportunity like a Summer League invitation arrives at the same moment your body has finally, cautiously, started to feel like yours again, you understand why a 24-year-old might choose to gamble the current window on the dream that started all of this, even at the cost of missing time with the country that has always claimed him as its own. That tension is the real anatomy of this moment, more than any single stat line. Gilas Pilipinas needs him. The Philippines has one of the most passionate basketball cultures on earth and one of the thinnest reserves of size ever to translate at the international level, and Sotto, whatever his box scores say in any given month, remains the single most important interior piece the program has developed in a generation. Every window he misses is a window where Tim Cohn's staff has to solve a spacing and rim protection puzzle with lesser tools. But an NBA opportunity does not wait patiently for a national federation's qualifying calendar, and at some point a player has to decide which clock he's actually racing. Step back from the week-to-week news, and a larger question sits underneath all of it. Where does Kai Sotto actually belong in the story of Philippine basketball, and what does this particular year, the tear, the surgery, the setback, the choice to chase Orlando over Gilas' duty, tell us about how that story is likely to end? I don't think anyone honestly knows yet, and I don't think pretending otherwise would serve you. What I can tell you is that the ledger, right now, holds both a caution and a case for optimism. The caution: 7'3" frames and surgically repaired knees have not historically been a kind combination in this sport, and a second injury, even a minor ankle tweak, in his very first game back is the sort of detail that keeps team physicians up at night. The case for optimism: this is a player who, before any of this happened, was already producing at a level that had NBA evaluators paying attention again, who has shown across 3 different Japanese franchises that his skill and feel for the game translate against professional competition, and who has now been patient, genuinely, uncomfortably patient, with a rehab that plenty of athletes in his position would have rushed. 5 years from now, this stretch of 2025 and 2026 will read as either the necessary detour on the way to a legitimate NBA rotation spot, or the moment a promising international story quietly stalled out the way so many 7-footer projects eventually do. Both endings are still available to him. What's already true, regardless of which one arrives, is that Sotto has spent this period doing the 2 hardest things professional basketball ever asks of a player at once: proving his body still works, and proving his priorities can withstand real pressure from a country that badly wants him on its floor. He chose Orlando's Summer League gym over a World Cup qualifying window this year. Whether that choice ages as wisdom or as a wrong turn depends entirely on what happens next, in games nobody has played yet, on a knee that is still, in its own quiet way, still healing. That's the part of the story television can't hand you neatly resolved. You just have to keep watching.